Hi everyone, this is Dr. Kingston, and in this video we will be talking about the pterygoid venous plexus. We are going to focus on what that pterygoid venous plexus is and the regions that it drains. The pterygoid plexus of veins is a network of smaller veins that sit in the infratemporal fossa, and they're found typically sandwiched in between the tendon of temporalis and the belly of the lateral pterygoid muscle. All right, so you can see here in the image that it runs in very close approximation to our maxillary artery here. And what we're going to see as we map out some of its connections beyond this spiderwebby mess here is that it ends up draining many of the same structures and regions that the maxillary artery supplies. So pterygoid plexus has two types of tributaries. The first you can think of as its main responsibilities. So this is a venous network. Its job is to drain specific regions and specific structures. And those tend to line up well with the maxillary artery. So it is responsible for draining the structures that the maxillary artery supplies. The second type of tributaries are connections with other venous pathways that drain adjoining regions. Now, as we have been slowly adding to our big picture of venous drainage in the head, I hope that you've been noticing that many of these veins connect to one another and form networks rather than single direction pathways. All right, really the only single direction pathways that we have venous-wise are our jugular veins, internal and external, that take blood completely out of the head. The rest tend to interconnect, and sometimes they flow one way, sometimes they flow another. It can be kind of infuriating, I know, to think about when you're trying to learn how all of these things work together. So I want you to try thinking of it this way. Venous blood is mostly relying on gravity to pull it back to the heart. So if you're standing upright, holding your head up straight, everything will naturally take the shortest path downward. But we don't always hold our heads up. We shake them around, right? And for roughly 8 hours a night, and I realize that that might seem like a cruel joke at your age and point in your education, so I am sorry. But for around 8 hours a night, we lay down to sleep. We put our head completely on a perpendicular plane to where it normally is. So having all of these interconnections like this provides some alternative pathways for blood to get back to the heart, no matter what position our head is in. And they're also excellent to have if one pathway or another gets blocked. Now, just because I said all of this, I want you to rest assured that I'm not going to start quizzing you on what the most likely pathway to get venous blood back to your heart is if your head is tilted at 45 degrees or something ridiculous like that. But I do want you to start appreciating all these little venous connections and to understand a little bit why we have them, why they exist. All right, so onward and upward into parallel maxillary artery drainage. All right, the pterygoid plexus drains the nasal cavity via the sphenopalatine vein. It's going to drain the cheeks via the buccal vein, the oral cavity via the greater palatine vein, the teeth via the inferior alveolar vein, the infratemporal and temporal fossae via the masseteric and deep temporal veins, and finally the cranial meninges via the middle meningeal vein. Again, these are all named exactly the same as branches of the maxillary artery, so it's not too difficult to add these in to your mental map of that. Now let's talk about its other connections here. So this pterygoid plexus is hooked up to the cavernous sinus via some emissary veins. You probably haven't heard that term in a hot minute, so let me just refresh your memory here. Emissary veins travel between the dural sinuses and the scalp, so they pass through tiny holes in the cranial bones. That makes this a direct pathway into the cranial cavity and that cavernous sinus. It also has a connection with the facial vein via the deep facial vein. So here's your facial vein crossing the mandible, coming up onto the face, and the facial vein is a little bit deeper and runs into our infratemporal fossa here. And through both of these connections, so through the emissary veins and cavernous sinus and through the deep facial and facial veins, we have additional connections up to the ophthalmic veins and the orbit here. Okay? The ophthalmic veins drain to the cavernous sinus here, but they also have connections to the facial vein here. All right? So having connections like this is important for understanding how infection can spread around the face. It can spread through any of these veins and take an infection all the way from your infratemporal fossa into your cavernous sinus or all the way out into your orbit. All right. So we've talked about where this is gathering blood from. Now I just quickly want to walk you through the pathway here of how this is going to drain. All right, so we have our two major sites for venous drainage. We have our external jugular and our internal jugular. Internal jugular is the biggest, so we're going to start with that. All right, so again, we're starting here on our pterygoid plexus of veins. To get to the internal jugular, we are first going to flow into the maxillary vein. And the maxillary vein is just this short little stump of a thing here. All right, that is going to take us back to the retromandibular vein. And remember, the retromandibular vein is going to split into an anterior division, posterior division. To get to the internal jugular, we would go through the anterior division. The anterior division is going to flow into the facial vein. And finally, that facial vein will take us all the way back to the internal jugular vein. All right, our secondary pathway here to get to the external jugular vein is going to start off very similarly. We'll exit the pterygoid plexus here through the maxillary vein and into the retromandibular vein. This time, though, we're going to head into the posterior division. The posterior division is going to join up with the posterior auricular vein here, and together those are going to form the external jugular vein. And that is how you get into and out of the pterygoid venous plexus. So here is your review question. An infection in the infratemporal fossa could spread to the cavernous sinus via which of the following? All right, the best answer here is B, the emissary veins. Now, we could argue back and forth that it could possibly path through the deep facial vein to the facial vein to the inferior ophthalmic into the cavernous sinus, but we're not going to do that. We're going to say there is a direct connection from the infratemporal fossa via those emissary veins through the cranial bones and directly into the cavernous sinus. All right, that is going to bring us to the end. Thank you for joining me.